The Hoop Heads Podcast is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
Hey Hoopheads! Wanted to take a minute to shout out our partners and friends at Dr. Dish Basketball. Their Dr. Dish shooting machines are undoubtedly the most advanced and user-friendly machines on the market, and they truly accelerate skill development faster than ever. Learn more at drdishbasketball.com and follow their incredible content at Dr. Dish B-Ball on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Mention the Hoopheads podcast and save an extra $300 on the Dr. Dish Rebel, All-Star, and CT models. Also, make sure to check out the new Dr. Dish Home Machine, which is perfect for these crazy times when gyms and schools are closed. Visit drdishbasketball.com for details. That's a great deal, Hoopheads. Get your Dr. Dish shooting machine today.
Hi, this is Coach Dan DeCrane from Gilmore Academy, and you're listening to the Hoop Heads Podcast.
Hey Hoopheads, we all hate ankle sprains, and they happen way too often. Ankle injuries are the #1 sports-related injury. Arise is trying to change that. With the iFast, your athletes get preventative protection and full mobility. Athletes no longer need to wear bulky braces that limit performance and give mediocre protection. Anyone playing sports should be using these products. Keep your athletes in the game. Don't wait for them to get hurt to take action. Visit www.arise.com, spelled A-R-Y-S-E, and use the code HOOPHEADS to get 20% off the future of performance. That's ARYSE.com with promo code HOOPHEADS to get 20% off.
I've never seen anyone with the type of work ethic and focus that Kobe had, and I think that's what ultimately separated him.
JJ Outlaw is in his second year as an assistant coach for the NBA's Cleveland Cavaliers. JJ previously spent 3 seasons with the Memphis Grizzlies, including the 2018-2019 campaign as an assistant coach focused on player development. Prior to that, Outlaw worked for the Los Angeles Lakers as a player development coach and video coordinator from 2011 to 2016, and as director of basketball operations for the Marist men's basketball program from 2009 to 2011, where he also served as an assistant coach during his second year. Outlaw played college football at Villanova, where he was a standout wide receiver. Following his collegiate career, he was signed by the Philadelphia Eagles for parts of the 2006 and 2007 seasons, and played for the Rhein Fire of NFL Europe in the spring of 2007. JJ and his father John share their unusual career paths, beginning as professional football players before finding their way to careers in the NBA. We recently launched the Hoopheads Mentorship Program. We believe that having a mentor is the best way to maximize your potential and become a transformational coach. By matching you up with one of our experienced mentors, you'll develop a one-on-one relationship that will help your coaching, your team, your program, and your mindset. The Hoopheads Mentorship Program delivers mentoring services to basketball coaches at all levels through our team of experienced head coaches. Find out more at hoopheadspod.com or shoot me an email directly, mike@hoopheadspod.com. Our roster of shows is growing, so don't forget to check out all our other podcasts on the Hoopheads Pod Network, including Thrive with Trevor Huffman, Beyond the Ball, the CoachMaze.com podcast, Players Court, Bleachers and Boards, and our team-focused NBA podcasts, Cavaliers Central, Grizz and Grind, Nuck If You Buck, The 305 Culture, Blazing the Path, and #Lakers. Motor City Hoops, Spanning the Spurs, the LA Hoops Report, and X's and O's NBA Breakdown are coming soon. We're looking for more NBA podcasters interested in hosting their own show centered on a particular team. Email us at info@hoopheadspod.com if you're interested in learning more and bringing your talent to our growing network. Listen to this episode and learn from the unique career path of JJ Outlaw, assistant coach for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Hello and welcome to the Hoopheads Podcast. It's Mike Klinzing here with my co-host Jason Sunkel, and tonight we are pleased to welcome to the podcast from the Cleveland Cavaliers, assistant coach JJ Outlaw. JJ, welcome to the Hoopheads Pod.
Thank you. Appreciate you guys having me.
We are very excited to be able to have you on and talk some Cavs basketball, talk some NBA basketball, and learn more about what is a very unique journey that you have to getting to this point in your career. So let's go back in time to when you were a kid. Talk to us a little bit about how you got into basketball and what your sporting life was like when you were young.
My sporting life sports was my life when I was young, and I'm fortunate to be able to say that it still is. I got into basketball, or I was introduced to basketball in the NBA at the age of 6, where my dad was working and coaching for the Denver Nuggets, and it was one of those things. Like, it was every day for me, Mike. Whether it was asking my dad questions or going to shoot arounds, as kids were allowed to do back in those days at the old McNichols Sports Arena in Denver, Colorado. But basketball was everything for me, and I really consider myself to be very fortunate to have been introduced to it at such a young age.
Who were the players that you looked up to at that time? Who were your guys on the Nuggets that kind of tolerated you and let you get some shots up while they were on the floor?
Everybody. LaFonso Ellis was great with me when I was younger. When my dad and them were in coaching meetings, he'd get to the arena earlier for shoot arounds, and in those days you didn't have the chefs and all the meals that we have the luxury of having now. So guys would just they'd come in, get a little treatment, and then they'd go up the street to Burger King. And so LaFonso would take me with him to Burger King, and those are things that you'll always remember. But Dikembe Mutombo, Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, all of those guys were amazing. I mean, Rod Strickland gave me my first bottle of cologne when I was in the 8th grade, and so
nice.
those are things that you'll always remember. Jalen Rose, Chris Webber, Juwan Howard, those guys.
Did you, in the moment when you were kind of going through and getting that behind the scenes access, for lack of a better way of saying it, did you have an understanding of how lucky or fortunate you were to be able to have those experiences? Or was it more a case of, I was a kid and it was the only experience I knew and I didn't have anything to compare it to? When you look back on it, how did you perceive it in the moment?
In the moment, I knew it was different than some of my friends at school, because everybody thought that it was so cool. Some of the things that I got to do, on a random Tuesday night when everybody kind of went home and did their homework. My dad was picking me up from school, or I'd rush home from school and we'd head right to the arena for a game. And so, those things became just normal experiences to me. But to be honest, I knew it was different, but I certainly have a better appreciation for it now than I did then.
So when you think about the game of basketball, obviously you got this early exposure to it, both through your dad, through the players that you were able to interact with, and just being involved and being around the NBA game clearly is going to have an impact on a kid and make you fall in love with the game. But it wasn't your only game that you played. So just maybe tell us a little bit about what your multi-sport athletic experience was like, because we all know that today there is much more of a trend than there was even 10 or 15 years ago for kids to be, I don't want to say forced into it, but there's a lot more pressure on kids to specialize in only one sport from a younger age if they want to get to a certain level. They get pressure from coaches or club teams or whatever, parents. So just talk a little bit about how your experience maybe was different and what you really appreciate about it as you look back on the totality of kind of your athletic life as a player.
Well, the thing I appreciated, is just the exposure, the things that I was exposed to, the different people that I was exposed to, the amount of coaches and teachers that I was exposed to. My father played in the NFL for 11 years and ended up coaching college football for 11 years at North Carolina Central University, and then made his way to the NBA in a number of positions before becoming an assistant coach. So football was always in the forefront. Football, like I always say, it was kind of in my blood, and basketball was my nature, right? So, you know, with my father, I idolize him. You know, he's my best friend, and I still can bounce anything off of him to this day. So, he never really pushed me one way or the other. I loved football. I loved the ability to compete. I love the physicality of the game, and for me, the two kind of just went hand in hand. I always felt like I brought some of that physicality to the basketball court, and I think it still shows itself today in my style of coaching.
Was the mental side of football and basketball, when you think back to maybe your time as a high school player, did you bring a different mental outlook, a different mental preparation, a different mental attitude to each one of those two games? Or was it you came in with sort of the same mentality? How would you describe the way you looked at it from a mental standpoint?
Well, one thing my dad always taught me is the more you can do, the more valuable you are. And so I always tried to know what everybody's job was on the football field, right? Like, I always wanted to understand the blocking schemes from the linemen. I wanted to understand the blocking schemes and the run schemes with the backs. I wanted to understand the reads from the quarterback, and in my position, the wide receiver position. Obviously, I wanted to know the route so that I could play as many of those positions as possible. And so when you can understand what 11 people are supposed to do on the field at any given point in time, it's pretty easy to be able to direct as a point guard and know what five guys are supposed to be doing at any point in time on the basketball floor. So from a mental standpoint, understanding the game of basketball, I won't necessarily say that it was easier, but I was probably a little bit more quick on my feet on the basketball court than I was on the football field, just because I was trying to figure out what everybody's job was.
Okay, so in order to be able to do that, that's not a normal ability that most people have to understand not only what their role and their position does on the field or on the court, but also to be able to understand what everybody else is supposed to be doing. There's not a whole lot of players, especially when you start talking about doing that at the high school level. There's just not many players who are capable of doing that. So is that something that just came naturally to you and then you poured your passion into figuring out even more? Or was it something that you felt like right from the beginning you had to really work at, and it was just important to you because you had this desire to be able to understand what was going on around you?
I won't say that it came natural. I think that it's something that I worked at, in practice, and just kind of years and years of doing it. I always felt like, again, having a father who was a coach, and was, a lifelong coach after he finished playing, I always tried to look at the game from that perspective. And so just knowing what the roles were of everybody kind of helped me prepare in that way. But it wasn't something that came natural. I think it's just the way that I viewed the game.
Yeah, when you have a dad who comes home and I'm sure was talking to you about different things and pointing out stuff and being able to talk you through it, that probably ignited your passion, number one, and then two, just gave you an insight and understanding that a lot of kids who their parent wasn't a coach, especially not at that level, didn't have those same insights. So let's talk a little bit about your dad, because I'm sure as we get more into your story here as we go along, we'll kind of see the parallels. But let's just talk a little bit about your dad's path. So he's a college football player, a professional football player, and eventually he makes his way into coaching in the NBA. So just tell us how that happens, and then tell us the why behind why did it happen? Why did your dad want to go that route, or what happened that enabled him to do that?
Right. So he played football at Jackson State University in Jackson, Mississippi, and was drafted by the New England Patriots. Played 5 years with the Patriots and played 6 years with the Philadelphia Eagles. And then upon retirement, started coaching college football at North Carolina Central. He coached defensive backs and was a defensive coordinator, an associate head coach. And he actually had 11 DBs go to the NFL from, a Division II, North Carolina Central at that time. And he wanted to get into the NFL and coaching in the NFL. And even for a former player who had played 11 years in the league, there wasn't a whole lot of opportunities for, black coaches at that point in the 80s in the NFL. And so my dad's best friend, and who's like family, Bernie Bickerstaff, in 1990, got the job with the Denver Nuggets as a general manager, and would eventually become, president, general manager, and head coach of the Nuggets. But he brought my dad with him. I was 6 at the time, and so that was my introduction to the world of basketball, and that was my introduction to the NBA. It kind of all happened at one point in time.
So what was your dad's first position with the Nuggets?
So his first position with the Nuggets was director of community relations, or like player relations. So one of the things that my dad has always been very good at is communicating. And I think those are some of the things that made him a good coach, is that he was able to communicate with players. And so one of his things that the first responsibilities that he had was to, help get the guys out into the community. Sometimes dealing with professional athletes, that can be a tough task. But my dad was pretty good at it, communicating with them. They understood that he knew where they were coming from, how busy their schedules were. And I think they responded well to him whenever he made requests for those things.
All right. So how does he eventually make his way from that job to getting a chance to be a coach on the floor and actually have some input from a basketball standpoint?
Right. So after that, he kind of worked his way up once he learned the game a little bit more, worked his way up into a scouting role, collegiate scouting role, and served in that capacity for a few seasons, and then worked his way up to eventually becoming an assistant coach. And, my dad was never like a huge X's and O's guy. He was more of a communication type of guy. He was, like I said, he was really good with players, communicating with players, and oftentimes served as somewhat of a liaison or a conduit between players and the head coach, or players and the front office at that time. It was a different NBA back into the 90s and early 2000s than where we are right now. And I think at that point, those things were of high value to a coaching staff.
All right. So I want to ask you this question, and that is, I know at some point in time your dad told you some kind of funny story or something that happened during his time coaching. Is there a story that from your dad's days coaching in the NBA, one that you can share that kind of is maybe off the beaten path, or something that was funny that he shared with you at some point? Is there one that sticks out?
Yeah, there is one that sticks out, and not that I don't remember the player's name, but I do know that they were in a like a draft interview or a player workout interview with a player in college, and as I've come to realize, not everybody in college basketball has a clean slate. Some of these guys have been through a lot of things, but a lot of these guys are super talented, and they can play at the next level. So in one of these draft interviews, as you guys I'm sure know, you have to dig into some of the things in their past and just kind of see how they react to it, how they talk about it, what they've learned from it, so on and so forth. And so in one of the draft interviews, they were asking one of the players, they said, we understand that, you had some issues in college, and, you got caught, smoking weed, or you failed some drug tests, and, that you really, you really burned some bridges. And the guy's response was, they said, "Coach, nah, I'm not going to lie to you. I did get caught smoking that stuff, and, I've learned from it, but whoever told you I burned down bridges, they lied, Coach. I never burned any bridges."
That's good. That's good stuff.
Yeah, so that was something that always kind of stuck out to me. And as I've gone through that process now, being on the being in the player's shoes at one point, but now being on the coaching side, I always try to remember that, these guys are going through a job interview, and to try to keep it light, because, some of the subjects are pretty touchy, but if you're investing in players, you're investing in young men, you kind of have to get into that stuff.
All right, so two things. One, just to comment on that, I'm sure every time you hear the phrase burning bridges, there's no doubt that story immediately pops into your head.
It's changed forever for me from a young age. Absolutely.
Absolutely. There's no question about that. All right, so number two is one of the things, and we'll kind of go forward here and then jump back to more about your playing career, but I think this is a good point to ask this question when we're talking about draft interviews. So this year, clearly the draft has been kind of goofy with it being pushed back in the season, everything that's going on with COVID and the quarantines and everything, and just the whole process has been quite different. But one of the things that's changed over the years, especially from when your dad was sitting in on interviews, is the guys that you're interviewing typically now are much younger, 2, 3, 4 years younger than those guys that your dad was bringing in, where typically you would only have had, maybe you had a hardship junior that was coming out, but for the most part, you were talking about 4-year college players that were coming out back in those days, whereas now you're talking about kids that are 19 years old. So when you talk about keeping it light, yet still trying to dig into finding out more about their personality, and I know there's some things that you can and can't share, but just talk maybe a little bit about what that process looks like when you're trying to get to the bottom of what kind of guy is this, and is he somebody that we want to bring into our organization, and trying to balance that with the fact that, these are 19-year-old, in essence, kids that are, you're trying to figure out what are they going to be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years down the road. Talk about maybe just what that process looks like a little bit.
Right, absolutely. So, we understand that, things happen, not for everybody, but we understand for, some players, some people, things happen. And so I think when you start to get into, issues of a checkered past or some trouble that they might have gotten into on campus, it's not the same as it was back then, because now a lot of those things, because these are big time programs and the media is covering them, a lot of these things are public knowledge. They've been on the bottom line of, ESPN. They've been scrolling across if a kid got suspended or whatever the case may be. So, ultimately we're just looking for honesty and transparency. If anybody is listening to this that would be going through that process, the teams already know, the teams have done their homework. They're not asking those questions. We're not asking those questions to find out what really happened. We already know what happened. We're just looking for honesty and transparency, and to make sure if it was something really bad, that the guys are contrite about it. And if a 19-year-old kid tells you the truth, and he tells you what he's learned from it, you can pretty much bet your money that that's a stand-up guy, and he's about his business, and he's going to become a good pro from that standpoint. But sometimes if a guy tries to back his way out of it and talk his way out of it and say it wasn't my fault, and you wonder if he's really learned from his mistakes. And if you haven't learned from your mistakes, then you're bound to repeat them again. So
yeah, absolutely. All right, next thing about the drafting process, when you look at a college player, are there skills, or I should say, what skill or skills do you think most clearly translate from lower levels of basketball into the NBA? So in other words, if this guy's a great rebounder in college, does that typically in your mind translate to the NBA? And if it's not rebounding, what's a skill that you look at, and when you see these college guys on film, or you watch them in a workout and you see them do X, you know that there's a pretty good chance that X is going to translate up to the next level that you guys need them to, to perform at?
It's interesting that you bring that up, right? Because we talk about it, and at this point where we are, playing hard is a skill, right? We've seen a lot of guys make a lot of money from just bringing energy and effort onto the basketball court, especially on the defensive end of the floor, right? Whether that be the ability to switch, and play multiple positions, whether that be the ability to the knack to grab rebounds, but the ability to play hard for a long time and have a lot in your tank, I truly believe is a skill. So, a guy that plays hard, when you watch his film, every game that you watch and every time that he's on the floor, he's given maximum amount of effort. I think that always translates because that's heart, and that's who that kid is, right? I think shooting translates. I think the difference with shooting as you move up the ranks is your shot has to get off a little bit quicker at this level, a lot quicker actually. And so you try to look at things like mechanics to see, like, yes, the shot goes in, but how slow is the shot? How slow is the release? I think rebounding translates, but ultimately more than anything, I think the ability just playing hard translates. For smalls, I think it's the ability to compete on the ball. This league is very, very pick and roll intensive. So the ability to compete on the ball, to get over the screens, the ability to defeat the screens is a skill that will translate well into the NBA.
All right, let's ask the reverse question. What's something that you see from a college player, and again, not talking about a specific player, but just in general, what's something that you see on film that you might think, wow, this guy was really good at this in college, but I'm not sure that this automatically translates that he's going to be able to do it at the NBA level?
Well, I think you have to look at defensive schemes, right? Like, some guys are really good defenders at the college level, or we would say good defenders at the college level, but they might have, kind of an issue defending in the NBA, right? Our players are bigger, faster, stronger, lengthwise they're a lot longer, and so sometimes in college I believe guys can become very, very good system defenders and very good team defenders. And we have a few more isolation possessions in our league than in college. And so I think that's a skill that, may not immediately translate. But the good thing about that is that, you can get better at that. And again, at the end of the day, those are just effort plays as well.
How long does it take, let's just say, an average rookie in your mind to be able to grasp some of the defensive schemes and concepts that they may have done at the college level to some degree, but certainly NBA defenses are far more sophisticated than what you see in college. So how long do you think it takes for the typical rookie to sort of get that, where they can make the right rotations and be in the right places and close down the right passing lanes and the right driving lanes? What does that process look like for bringing along a rookie to get them up to speed where you'd like them to be? And clearly it's an ongoing process, but just where you feel like they at least have a grasp of it where they're not going to kill you.
Right. Well, let me answer it this way. I think it takes, maybe 2 to 3 seasons for players to fully develop in the NBA. And so with that being said, I think it really depends on how many minutes and how much live game action guys can get early in their career. And I think, anybody can do something well for 1 or 2 possessions, right? I think where you really start to see the maturation in some of these young guys is when you start to see consistency night in and night out. One of the things that Coach Bickerstaff always talks about, and Coach Fizdale talked about a lot, is that defense travels, right? So, offensively, you're not going to have it every night. In fact, we see a lot of these guys run into, that rookie wall that we talk about. But defense travels, and when you can pick it up and when you can be a consistent defender in the NBA, or just not a liability defensively, I think you can start to see more minutes, and coaches have a lot more trust in you out on the floor.
So for a guy who's not playing, obviously during a normal NBA season, the amount of practices that you're getting once the season starts is pretty minimal. So if you have a rookie or a second-year player that isn't playing much, what do you as a coaching staff try to do to enable that player to continue to grow and develop, even though they're not maybe getting the reps that they need out on the floor in order to do it? Is it a lot of film work? Is it a lot of before and after games? Are you getting any time out on the floor with those guys? Just describe what that process might look like.
It is. It's a lot of film work, and I think you have to be specific with it, right? I mean, obviously, we all know Rome wasn't built in a day, so you have to find really good examples of good possessions defensively where guys can see people doing and other players doing the right thing. And again, it always helps if you have some good clips from your team and what you're trying to do schematically defensively. But from a development standpoint, short-sighted games after practice, before practice at times, before games if those guys aren't getting a lot of minutes, and to where you can really mold the action and you can really just kind of hone in on the action that you want to cover, that you want to work on, whether it be, pick and rolls into multiple pick and rolls, whether it be second side action, but wherever you are with those short-sided games, 2-on-2, 3-on-3, I think you can really isolate a lot of actions and get guys a lot of reps to the point where they're comfortable in those situations.
Do you want to score more? Training with the Shoticle is the easiest way to score more. The game is changing, and data scientists are determining the best ways to score. Millions of computer simulations determine where to hit the backboard for the highest percentage shots and when it's best to use the backboard. The Shoticle provides those highest percentage shots. From beginners to next-level athletes, the Shoticle is helping players increase their shooting percentages. Visit Shoticle.com now and start scoring more. How would you say, compared to when you first came in the league, how has the general overall level of players' shooting ability improved from your first year in the NBA with the Lakers versus where you are now with the Cavs? Just across the board, have you seen the shooting improve? Obviously, as the style of play has changed and there's become such a premium on spacing over the last 10 years, what does that look like in terms of the skill level of players? Because to an outsider, to a novice observing the NBA game, you just see so many more guys now who can shoot the ball when you compare it back to the early 2000s. So just what do you see from a guy who's inside and getting to see these guys day in and day out?
Well, I think you see a lot of guys working on their shots, a lot of guys that you wouldn't have seen, when I first came in the league 10 years ago. A lot of times, your bigs would, we had the bigs when I was with the Lakers were, Andrew Bynum and Pau Gasol. In that second year, we got Dwight. And not to say that those guys weren't capable of walking out on the floor and shooting a three-point shot, but the majority of their workouts were around the basket, working on their footwork, working on their strength, working on, hooks on both shoulders and up and unders and some of the traditional footwork stuff and that we've come to know from post players. And now, guys are mixing in, a solid, 25 to maybe 50% of their workouts out on the perimeter shooting threes because everybody wants to play 5-out basketball. Everybody wants Swiss Army knives that can do multiple things. And I think with that, you get guys, bigs that are now better playmakers as well, not only scorers and shooters from the perimeter, but you see a lot of the bigs in our league now that are able to make plays, that you're able to run offense through, that are able to assist in other players getting shots.
What's the sentiment inside the league in terms of the trend of how the game has become so focused on sort of the analytical idea of threes, layups, free throws that some teams like the Rockets have taken to the extreme, and just about every team has embraced it to some degree? What's the sentiment among coaches in the league as far as that style of play, coaching it? Is there any thought? Is there anybody talking about, hey, there could be some things that we'd like to change about the game to maybe bring post play back into it a little bit more? Or are people just fully embracing where the game is now? Just what are people talking about when you sit down in the coach's office? What do those conversations sound like in terms of where the actual game is today?
I think everybody's embracing it. I mean, I think you have to, right? I mean, we've seen the scoring go up in the NBA from night to night. Like you said, you mentioned Houston Rockets. It's basically threes, layups, and free throws for them. But you have to embrace it. Basketball has always evolved, and it's going to continue to evolve. You know, I don't know what it'll look like 10 years from now, but I know one thing's for certain, it'll be different than it is today. So one of the things I applaud a lot of the coaches in our league is they're extremely smart, they're very intelligent, and they all have, growth mindsets. And so they're willing to change maybe what they originally thought, as they were growing up in their coaching careers. And most of them do a really good job of evolving with the game, and not only the game, but evolving with the personnel that they're working with.
Yeah, I think that's something that when you're looking at how you coach your team and figuring out, okay, what do we have on our roster? What do we have guys that do well, and trying to scheme and maximize what each individual player has. And then you take that and put it into the greater confines of the league and what the style of play is and how different teams are going to scheme against you defensively to be able to take away your strength. And I think with the sheer amount of, I'm sure the statistics that you guys have available and all the film work and things compared to, again, think back to the time when your dad was coaching and you're popping in the VHS tape and trying to watch video that way, and how much more of a challenge that was at that time compared to what you guys can do now in terms of being prepared. And I think that's one of the things that is always fascinating about playoff basketball is compared to the regular season, you just have so much more time to be able to prepare your team to play the same team over and over again in a 7-game series. And you can really dive down deep into what they do. Whereas in the regular season, maybe you don't have as much time, but certainly the coaching staffs have to take into account, what's our style of play, and then what's the other team going to do to us, and what is our personnel going to allow us to do. And I'm sure that takes a tremendous amount of time. Can you talk a little bit about the difference from what it's like to prepare for a playoff series with the coaching staffs that you've been with compared to maybe what it's like to prepare for a regular season game?
Absolutely. So, my first playoff experience, I was fortunate enough the first 2 years that I was in the NBA with the Lakers under Mike Brown that first year, and then the second year, Mike D'Antoni, his first year there in LA, we went to the playoffs. And if you remember, my first year was the lockout season. So back then we had back to back games, and I think there was only one day in between. We played our last game, I want to say, was on like Thursday in Sacramento, and then we had the first game of the playoffs, I think, that Saturday versus Denver. And we were sleeping in the office. We had air mattresses and pillows and whatnot. We were sleeping in the offices, and we were grinding away at the film. We were making sure that the playoff books were printed out. And at that point, I was a video coordinator, so I felt not necessarily pressure, but I wanted to make sure that everything was right, and Mike Brown demanded that it be right. And so for me, he was an unbelievable person to work for, an unbelievable coach to work for, and that staff was so amazing. And so for me, that experience was all out. I felt like that was exactly what you had to do in order to be successful. We won that playoff series versus Denver and ended up getting knocked out in the second round versus Oklahoma City. And then to the last time that I made the playoffs, which was my first year in Memphis, we ended up losing in the first round to San Antonio. But the preparation for me was a bit different because at that point I had a greater advanced scouting role. So I was separated from the team for almost maybe the last 3 or 4 weeks of the season, and I was just following San Antonio around, digging into Coach Pop and what he was running out of ATOs and all of their play sets and substitution patterns and everything like that. But I think in the regular season, most teams are really trying to be good at what they do, right? Like night to night, things may change. You might tweak things, but if you're really good and your team is really focused on what you do well, you have a chance and an opportunity to beat any team in the league on any given night. I think in the playoffs, where it changes is not only do you have to be good at what you do, but you also have to be prepared for the tendencies for what the opposing team is going to do. And so I think, if you watch some of those bubble games, the playoff games, they were so intense because they eliminated the travel, they eliminated the energy of fans, and the home court advantage, and you really got to see highly competitive, highly intelligent athletes and very smart coaches try to outdo each other. And so I think that was really good for me to see. And I did all my studying on each of those teams because I didn't have anything else to do because we weren't down there.
Right, exactly. So going into that, here's a question that I have for you. Going into it, I don't think anybody on the outside necessarily knew what to expect in terms of the level of play, because clearly if you're an NBA player, you probably have not played, especially if you're a veteran, you have not played in front of nobody for a long time. Because if you were an NBA prospect when you were in high school and you're playing at a big time AAU tournament, there's an atmosphere kind of that goes along with that. And in the bubble, especially initially when there weren't anybody else, families weren't there and there was a limited number of people, one of the things that Jason and I talked about on our podcast when we were talking about, we talk NBA sometimes, was we were wondering what the quality of play would like and what the intensity level would be like, and would the lack of fans and the lack of a quote normal atmosphere, would that impact in any way? And clearly that was not the case. I mean, if anything, I would say that it raised the level of play because it was just it became almost so personal and you could hear everything and all those things that go along with it. So going into it, what was your thought about sort of the way that the games were going to play out from a competitiveness standpoint? And you mentioned about not having to travel and just all those things combining. It seemed like it really added to the level of play. Is that what you thought was going to happen going in, or were you a little surprised by that?
I wasn't surprised by it. These guys, when you see them day in and day out, Mike, like these guys are just unbelievable athletes. They're highly intelligent players. They really do a great job of film study. But I think the biggest thing is it may have been a little strange at first, but so many of them have such a high focus level obviously as it was on display down there, that it was probably different maybe for the first, maybe during warmups, and maybe the first couple possessions. But I give a lot of credit to all the teams that were down there for the amount of time that they were down there. I think the players and the coaches did a really good job of focusing in and not allowing the lack of fans to be a distraction, if that makes sense.
No, it totally does. I think certainly a huge challenge from a mental standpoint. I think one of the things that I thought about a lot is if you're a player and you're in a playoff series and you have a bad game and you have to wait. In this case, they were playing every other day, so you have to wait a full day without a game and then wait most of the next day until you play your game that evening. If you're at home and it's kind of a normal environment, or even if you're on the road, whatever, there are things that you can do to distract yourself from a poor performance. So I can go out to dinner with my family, or I can walk, there's other things that I can do. Whereas in the bubble, I have a bad game and I kind of got to go back and just sit in my hotel room and kind of stew on it. And yeah, I can watch film and I can think about it. But that was one of the things that I wondered. Did you talk to any of your friends around the league kind of about what it was like, especially after a loss, kind of what teams did or how they tried to help players cope with that situation?
It's interesting. I really didn't. I think the thing that the bubble provided was also, even though it wasn't normal, there still were elements to the game that could have been a sense of normalcy. And what I mean by that is I think any player who has a bad game, especially in the playoffs or just any time really, the first thing that they're going to do is try to get back into the gym as soon as possible, right? They're going to try to get shots. They're going to watch film. And all of those things were still available to them in the bubble. In fact, the ability to hop back on the shuttle or go to the practice facility that they might have had at the hotel or whatnot and get in the gym, I think was probably even more readily available than it normally would be if you were home. And so, from what I know of guys, when they have bad performances, to a man, I haven't been around anyone who's wanted to get away from it at any point in time. Most of these guys, what they want to do is just try to work through it. So I think the ability to have everybody down there without their families, without any of the distractions. I'm sure there were a lot of coaches that were in the gyms with players the night after games or, obviously early the next day before practice. So that piece of it, I'm sure, probably stayed the same.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess if you can go back and put your work in and trust in your process and then know that you're going to come back and bounce back and have a better game the next time, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think one of the things that, we kind of take for granted on the outside, and you mentioned it, is just, so often I think you look at an NBA player and you see sometimes their physical gifts, and we forget about the mental side of it and just how mentally tough and strong those guys have to be able to go out in front of, obviously not in the bubble, but under normal circumstances, they're going out and playing in front of 20,000 people 82 nights a year and being judged publicly. And that takes a lot of mental strength to be able to do that, to be able to have a good performance, a bad performance, and continue to work at it and have that growth mindset that you talked about with coaches, and players have that same thing. Mm-hmm. And also, again, knowing that if you're a guy who's maybe not in the top half of the roster, that you're not only are you competing to help your team win and all that, but you're also in many times competing to keep your job and keep your place in the league. And we all know that, every year come draft time, you bring in another 50 or 60 guys that are looking to take people's jobs who are already established in the league. And so clearly, I think that it's another way, I'm sure, that the league has changed over the course of time that you've been in there, just with the advances. And you mentioned it earlier with team chefs and strength and conditioning and sleep and recovery and all the things that science and medical has brought to the table that didn't exist 15 or 20 years ago in the league. I'm sure that that's increased the players' ability to bounce back and to be able to recover and put their best performance out on the floor night in and night out.
Yeah, I mean, the things that guys have available to them now in the facilities, from obviously when I first got my first glimpse at the NBA in 1990 when I was 6 is truly remarkable. As much as owners and organizations put into the guys to really make these facilities feel like home, to the point where guys, once they leave practice, they might go home and get a massage or eat dinner or whatever the case may be. But a lot of guys are coming back to the gyms at night, and the organization certainly welcome that and make it easy for them to feel at home and feel comfortable so they can get their work in.
That's when you're catering in Burger King?
Yeah, no, not anymore. Not anymore. The chefs do such a great job, man. It really is an unbelievable experience. And to be honest with you, from what I've heard, a lot of the bigger colleges and stuff like that, they do a really good job of trying to, mimic some of that service to make sure that their athletes are well fed and have the right nutrition as well, because that's such a big piece of it, especially when you're talking about longevity.
Yeah, it really is. All right, so let's piggyback on that and kind of jump back to you as a player. So when you were at Villanova and you're playing football there, mm-hmm. What did your nutrition habits look like? What did you do as a player? Was that something that you were conscious of, or was that something where you were just like, I'm just going to eat whatever it is that I eat? Or were you already aware of it at that point, how important that could be in your performance?
I started, it kind of came in waves, if I'm being honest. As a freshman, I think I had to get used to what that level of competition meant. And so after my freshman year, the spring of my freshman year, I really started to kind of try to hone in on my nutrition, as I truly believed that it was making me a better player. It allowed me to be faster. It allowed me to have more power and to get more separation. And then I had to kick it up another notch my senior year as I was preparing myself for the NFL. And so I recognized that there was going to be a big jump from not only the level of competition, but from a strength standpoint as well. And so, I really tried to really hone in on my diet, hone in on my weight training at that point in time in my career as well.
Did that come from you, or did that come from the coaches at Villanova, or an outside influence, or your dad? Or where did that focus, or where did that ability to understand that come from?
I think at first it came from my coaches at Villanova, and it came from our strength and conditioning staff. We kind of had a revolving door. We had like 3 different programs or 4 different programs the 4 years that I was there. But then afterwards, I was able to get with a trainer who was training a lot of guys that were already in the NFL, and so he basically just broke it down to me. He said, these teams, they know what you can do on the field, but they're essentially paying you to eat right and take care of your body. And so, that was a wake up call too when you put it in those ways. And that's essentially the message that I try to pass on to guys without beating them over the head with it. But they at this point, we have a lot of things that are at their disposal and a lot of information and education about nutrition and those things.
Are there guys that still come into the league that are uneducated about those things, or are most guys at least somewhat familiar with what they should be doing? Not that they have perfect habits at age 18 or 19 years old, but are most guys at least aware of what they should be doing? It's just that a lot of times I'm guessing that they're young and they can bounce back and they're fantastic athletes, so they can kind of maybe get away with some cheating that other people couldn't.
I haven't met one that knew it when they came
Really?
in. I haven't, not one.
Okay.
Not one. I mean, just simple things about, now you're in the NBA and, your guys wouldn't eat breakfast before they come in for a workout. So now you're putting them through an NBA workout, and in, 15, 20 minutes into the workout, they're dying. And you're like, wow, like, is this guy out of shape? And it's not that he's out of shape. It's just he doesn't have any fuel in his body. And so, they learn those things quickly, but they don't know that coming in right away. No, not at all.
So when a guy's at home, how are you as the team? How's the team impacting them when they're making choices about what they eat at home before they come into the facility?
So a lot of guys, they're probably not eating at home. They're probably eating breakfast. They're going to eat their breakfast at the facility. So we have a nutritionist. We have, 2 chefs that are, very good at, number one, finding out if a guy has allergies, if he's allergic to anything. They can make meals specific to each guy according to their needs. And again, too, we give a lot of credit to our strength and conditioning coach, Derek Millender, and his staff. They do a great job with our team. Our nutritionist, Kylene Bogdan, our chef, Chef Terry Bell. Like, they do such a great job with our people, with our team and our players, and with our staff as well. That comes after the players, but they're certainly available to give any information.
So what is that? I'm just curious what that process looks like. So let's say you're going to have practice on an off day in the season. How many meals are the guys eating on the team? From the team. How many meals are guys eating from the team, wherever that may be?
Are we at home or are we away?
Let's say we're at home.
Yeah. Well, it's usually kind of like a buffet style.
Okay.
And most of it is healthy. Every now and again, they'll throw the guys a bone and give them something that is a little unhealthy but still tastes good. Every Tuesday we have some sort of like Taco Tuesday. I think that's
nice.
Pretty universal around the league.
There you go.
But Yeah, I mean it's buffet style. So unless a guy has some specific dietary restrictions or something, a guy might some guys need to lose a little bit of weight, and then some guys need to put some on, and that's just not from rookies. That's across the board. I mean, everybody's going to have a recovery shake, or at least everybody's going to have one made for them, whether they drink it or not. But those things are important. It's the nutrition before you work out, but also what you're putting in your body afterwards, the things that you've lost out on the floor.
Yeah, it's just amazing to me when you look at the amount of change that has been undergone in those standpoints, from nutrition to recovery to sleep to strength and conditioning, and just where we were 20 or 30 years ago. You look at, let's take the era of when Larry Bird played, and you have just the things that guys in that era did or had to do, and didn't have the knowledge of all the things that and advantages that guys have today. I think what's striking to me most often is whenever I look at and I'll see old pictures from the 70s of guys who are playing, or you see old basketball cards from that 70s and 80s era, and you just look at the guys' bodies and you're like, wait, these guys are NBA players? They look like they're in high school.
Right.
I remember seeing a picture of Doug Collins in his first year, and he had on the gold chain, with the from the era. And Doug Collins seriously looked like he could have been like a 16-year-old high school guard with like the tiny, skinny little arms. And it's just amazing when you look at the bodies and the physical tools that these guys have today compared to what players had 20 or 30 years ago.
Come on, Mike. They were smoking cigarettes and drinking beers at halftime, weren't they? At some point. I remember
at some point they were, for sure.
I saw some pictures.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah. You look at, I laugh too when you look at like the old pictures from like the Bill Russell era Celtics, and you look at the pictures of the Boston Garden or these other arenas where it's all hazy because all the fans are smoking in the arena. Yeah. And you just think, oh my God, like how, at what level could these guys reach with some of and then you think about the travel, the way you guys travel compared to the way even those teams of the 80s would have traveled, where in a lot of cases teams were still flying commercial. It's just, it's incredible just the way that the game has evolved. And as a result, the quality of play and the level of play, how good it is today.
The NBA travel of the 80s and before that was very similar to some like the way like the G League would travel now, right? So like if you had a back-to-back, and when I was working for Byron Scott with the Lakers, he would always tell us some of those stories. But it really does shape it shapes scheduling, it shapes the league, it shapes recovery, right? So like back then, if you had a back-to-back, you still stayed the night in that city because you were flying commercial. Then everybody just got up extremely early and basically caught the first flight smoking to the next city, and then you'd get to the hotel, you'd sleep throughout the day, and then you'd have to play that night. They didn't have chartered flights where they were leaving and getting into that city and getting a good night's rest and the ability to sleep in like guys do now. It just didn't exist back then, and so it's hard to kind of tell guys like, hey, well, this is the way it was back then, because again, right. The way they know is the way they know. And I'm certainly thankful for that. I'll be honest.
Yeah, no question. I mean, I think you look at it from a coach's perspective too. Just you look at the way that the staffs have grown, and you mentioned it with the nutritionist and strength and conditioning and all the different people that the mental side of a sports psychologist. And you look back on some of those teams again back in the 70s, 80s, and you have there's a head coach and there's maybe two assistants, and that's it. I mean, that's the whole. Yeah. And there's a trainer, and basically that guy was there to probably hand out Band-Aids and, tape up an ankle.
Yeah, Gary Vitti used to.
Yeah, yep.
Gary Vitti used to tell all these stories, from back in the 80s, how, he was the video coordinator. He packed up all the video equipment, and, that's all they had. They didn't have, coaches behind the bench. They didn't have any of the, luxuries of a staff that we have now, that I've certainly benefited from. So
Yeah, for
I'm
sure.
happy about that.
Absolutely. All right, so let's talk a little bit about your journey. So you get done at Villanova as a football player. You get some opportunity to play in the NFL. You get to go to a couple training camps with the Eagles. Just talk a little bit about your professional football experience. And then as that ends, then you start to shift your mindset and you move into basketball. So just talk a little bit about your professional football experience and then when, where, why, how you transitioned into, hey, I want to become a basketball coach.
Well, Mike, you just summed it up. That was it, right?
All right, there you go. Good. Story's over. Done.
Yeah, no, as far as my professional football career was concerned, that was it. Was signed as a free agent with the Eagles and was fortunate enough to attend a couple training camps with them and played a season over in NFL Europe. And so when that was over, a group of friends, we started a sports nutrition company. And I loved that. I love the grind of like entrepreneurship and the ability to build something from the ground. It was very similar to coaching, right? We all had our different roles. We all had things that we were good at. One of my buddies was very good at sales. One was another ran the warehouse, the packaging. I had another that was really good at being a digital creator, and so he made the websites, and so it was all like we all had our strengths, and so we were able to kind of like build this company from the ground up. But when I got an opportunity to coach at Marist College for Coach Chuck Martin, it was it wasn't paying much money at all, but it wasn't about the money for me. I just wanted an opportunity to get into coaching, something that had been a lifelong dream for me. Again, it talked about it, something that I had seen my father do, and so the thought of coaching college basketball was all I needed. And Chuck hired me, and I was there for 2 seasons, about a season and a half, and then it was New Year's Eve of that lockout season. We went to, obviously in college basketball during that winter period, that New Year's Eve, Christmas period, there's no school, so a lot of college teams will go 2-a-days during that time period. So we had a practice on New Year's Eve that morning, and then I went back and got lunch at my house, and in between those 2 practices, Mike Brown called me and asked me, could I come to LA as his video coordinator, and I said absolutely. There was no hesitation, and so he ended up calling and talking to Chuck, and by the time that by the time I went back for that second practice that night, I was a member of the Los Angeles Lakers, and that's how quickly things changed. That was a Saturday. I was in Poughkeepsie, New York, working at Marist, and then on Tuesday, I was on the floor with Kobe Bryant, the Los Angeles Lakers, and we were playing the Golden State Warriors that Tuesday, and so that's how quickly it changed for me, man. That was 10 years ago, and I've just been fortunate enough to stick around the NBA and a multitude of positions with a few different teams.
All right, so 2 questions. One, why basketball and not football is number one. And then number 2, clearly these opportunities don't arise out of nowhere. So how does that call from Mike Brown come to be? How were you connected to Mike Brown, and just what led to that phone call coming to JJ Outlaw and not somebody else? So
right.
Why football, not basketball? And then how does that phone call from Mike Brown get to you?
Well, I always enjoyed the dynamic of coaching basketball. I loved having a smaller staff, but everybody having an input on the game plan from an offensive defensive standpoint, and the development piece of it. So that was always intriguing to me. Nothing against coaching football or football coaches, but I always felt like from my experiences that everybody didn't have an impact on the game plan. You might, do what you could defensively or work with your position group. And so the ability to work with the whole team and have personal relationships with the staff and the whole team was always really intriguing to me. So that's why it was basketball, coaching basketball over football for me. And then I mentioned when we were in Denver, my dad was working for the Nuggets. My godfather, who was Bernie Bickerstaff, he is a USD grad, University of San Diego grad, as well as Mike Brown. And so he gave Mike Brown his first opportunity in the NBA as a video coordinator with the Nuggets. I think it was in like 1992. And so I had known Mike pretty much, my whole life, or since I was, about 8 years old. And so he knew that I was coaching at Marist. And that first year that I was at Marist, he was actually out of the NBA, just kind of working with his sons here in Ohio and Cleveland. And so I reached out to him because I wanted to, again, I was just getting into college coaching, and so I wanted to know the lay of the land as far as Cleveland AAU was concerned. And I knew that his son Elijah was was too good of a player to play at Marist, but I figured there may be some other guys around, and if Mike could point me in the right direction to kind of get the lay of the land as far as AAU coaches and things like that. And so he knew I was coaching at Marist when he got back into the league the next year with the Lakers. And so I'm extremely fortunate, extremely blessed that he called me, and like you said, not someone else, and gave me an opportunity to come in at the bottom as a video coordinator and work my way up.
What do you remember about the first one or two lessons or things that you learned about the league when you first got to the Lakers? What's some things that stand out to you that first year just really popped in your head? They're like, man, this is some high level stuff.
It was the terminology, Mike, honestly. Again, I was coming from Marist College, and we weren't very good. We worked hard, but we weren't very good. Our record didn't show for us. And so when I got there, at that point, like, I was still learning, right? So like I was still learning on the fly. So at that point, I was still trying to learn the way that Coach Chuck Martin wanted things done at Marist, and the players that we had there. And all of a sudden, in a matter of days, now I'm rebounding for Kobe Bryant, or I'm chopping film for Pau Gasol, or I'm doing something for Derek Fisher, and the terminology of everything that was going on was somewhat overwhelming. But again, I just kind of stayed with it. The people that were around me did a really good job of helping me along, and probably holding my hand through a lot of things at that time. And so because of that, I'm always willing to help people out, and again realize that none of us know anything, know everything, but we all need a little help at the beginning to kind of get going.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you start to grow and develop there, eventually you move out of the video room, you get an opportunity to be more of a coach on the floor on the player development side. What did that transition look like for you? And what was the learning curve there from going from the video room out onto the court to actually work with the players on the basketball floor as opposed to just cutting up video for them?
It was an amazing transition. I'd love to tell you that it was smooth, and I think I'd be lying. But I remember my first scout was with Mike D'Antoni. It was a preseason game, and he gave me the scout, and I forget the team that we were playing. It was a team from overseas that we had in a preseason game, and again, having the scout means that you watch 5 or so games on that team. You break down the film, you break down their personnel, their favorite plays, their ATO plays, everything that you can remember about the team. It's your job to break it down, explain it to the coaches, and then explain that information to the team. So my first scout was in a preseason game, and it just so happened that we're in Staples Center, and it happened to be like the American Express like fan kind of experience, right? So normally when you do a scout, it's to an empty gym. It's just the team and the coaching staff. But this particular one happened to be in front of about 500 people. So that was an experience. And I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous. But what I was I was confident in the information that I was given. And so, that part of it made it easier for me.
Yeah, when you have good information and you feel confident about what you're doing, it can obviously ease the transition into trying to do something like what you just described. So what was the highlight of your time with the Lakers? Is there one thing, one player, one moment, a story that you can share from that time that really sticks out to you?
It's probably two. Um, the biggest one, I think the one that meant the most to me, is I had the ability to work with Kobe Bryant for the better part of those 5 years, and that just meant that I was getting up early with him at some of those 5:30, 6 a.m. workouts. We were rebounding. We worked together a lot on the road, as he was one of those guys, as you can imagine, that always wanted to be in the gym. But as he was coming back from injury, one of my jobs was to kind of put the offensive playbook together for Coach D'Antoni. And basically, he drew up all the plays, and I just kind of put them into the program on the computer and then produced the book for him. But as Kobe was coming back from his Achilles injury, he wanted to go through the offensive playbook, and so I gave him my playbook, and he returned it to me probably about maybe 2.5 weeks later in the film room. And in typical like Kobe fashion, he didn't say much. He just brought it and he just kind of put it in my lap, and he looked at me and he just said, "It's a good book. It's a good book." And it gave me a feeling. Having that endorsement from him was amazing. I think that's something that I always try to like carry with me now, even if I'm having like a bad day, or even if you mess up on something that one moment when the greatest player in the world gave you a compliment on a project that you had done, and that meant a lot to me. And then the second one was probably his last game in Staples. That was an exciting thing to be a part of, and I knew it was extremely special then, but given the events that have transpired, that's something that I'll always hold near and dear to me.
What makes a guy like him the best in your mind? Because clearly, when you look at players in the NBA, you have guys that have tremendous physical gifts all throughout the league. And it's not necessarily that Kobe was more physically gifted than anybody else in the league. What, in your mind, sets apart those guys who are the top 10, top 15 players in the league? Is there one thing, multiple things that you can point to that set those guys apart from everybody else who is, they're one of the best 350 basketball players in the world? What sets that top 1% apart from everybody else?
It was his ability to focus, right? And his ability to focus on what he was doing, his ability to focus on the game plan, his ability to focus in his work ethic, in his workouts. And I think that is what separates. I've seen a lot of talented guys, certainly come through the NBA, but I've never seen anyone with the type of work ethic and focus that Kobe had, and I think that's what ultimately separated him.
How does that focus manifest itself compared to other players? Like when you say he's more focused, does that mean that he can dial in during games in adverse situations? Does that mean that he's able to practice longer, harder than other guys? Does it mean he puts more time in the film room? What is that focus? How does that show itself?
So I'll give a couple examples. So the first example would be whenever he worked out, like he never talked, right? So if he was making, say 30, 40, maybe even sometimes 50 shots at a spot, or 50 reps at a move, we never talked. So if his number was 50, whenever he was, at 48 or whatever, whenever he had two more left, whatever the number was, I'd just call out 8. And then he would know that he had to make two more, and then he'd move to the next spot. So like we never talked. The most that I ever said was 8, and so and he would just lock in. He never, I never saw him kick a basketball. I never saw him get mad at himself. I never saw him talk to himself. I never saw any of that. He just continued to lock in and focus throughout the whole time. Sometimes we'd be in there for 3 hours, man. Like it, and he wouldn't talk. He'd just work and just be drenched in sweat. And he had the ability to keep doing the same thing over and over again for, like I said, sometimes it'd be 50 reps of the exact same move. And that right now is like very difficult with a lot of players that, we see around the NBA, that a lot of them, you ask them to do something and they might do it the same for maybe 2 times, and then that third time there's some sort of variation, right? Because they've gotten bored with it or whatever the case. Kobe had the ability to do the exact same thing, no matter how complicated or simple, the exact same way over and over and over again. So that's one example of the focus. The second is prior to games, obviously we're watching film, you're going over the scout information. And, as he got older, he needed more work on his body, obviously, right? So, he'd have somebody, working on one leg. He'd have somebody working on another leg. He'd have like that big, huge, like oversized ball that he was like kind of, playing around with and stretching out. And, he'd be doing his activation, and you'd look at it and you'd be like, well, there's no way he's paying attention to this film. And then out of nowhere, he'd just be like, stop it, pause it right there. And then he'd like break down something that was happening on the film, and he'd be talking to another teammate, letting them know, like, look, when they do this, like, we'll be able to exploit it here. And you'll be like, he wasn't even watching the TV. Like, there's no way he could have known what was going on, but he did. And he knew it. He knew it all. And that was super impressive.
Yeah, I think there's probably, I'm sure you see it, that there are varying degrees of guys that have that kind of understanding. Like obviously there was a lot of talk in the bubble about, as the Lakers win the title, that LeBron and Rondo kind of had this mind meld of they're two guys who can kind of do what you just described with Kobe, that not only can they understand what they're supposed to do, but they know what everybody's supposed to do. They can anticipate a move ahead of what the defense is going to be doing. And it just seems like to be able to develop that, one, the amount of reps in basketball that you have to have experience in order to have that. And then I think there's a gift in there too, to be able to understand and be able to process what's going on the floor. Like some guys can see the play that's in front of them. Some guys can see the next play, but guys like Kobe or LeBron, they're seeing 2-3 plays ahead of everybody else. And then you combine that with their maniacal work ethic, and you combine that with the physical tools that they have, and there's no secret why the best are the best.
Right. And they can break down any play, right? Like any play that happened in that game, they have the mental capacity and the gift to be able to break down a play, just off memory, and that's special.
Does Kobe was he a guy who could go back to some random regular season game from 2 years ago and you could pull up a clip and he could remember what happened in that particular clip?
You wouldn't even have to pull up the clip. He could just tell you, like if you were pointing something out, you could say like, last year or 2 years ago in your series with Dallas, what happened here. And he could tell you everything. It was quite amazing, but again, you're talking about, one of one, you're talking about, the elite of the elite. And those are the things that separate guys.
Absolutely. All right, let's move from the Lakers. You get an opportunity to go to Memphis. Talk a little bit about how that came to pass and what your role was in Memphis and some of the things that you remember from your time there.
So that was a great opportunity for me. Like I said, spent 5 years with the Lakers and then went to Memphis for 3. That first year, under Coach David Fizdale. It was awesome. I really enjoyed Memphis as a city. I enjoyed the organization. Got a chance to work with some unbelievable players. You talk about Mike Conley, Marc Gasol, Vince Carter, Tony Allen, Zach Randolph. It was amazing. And then to end that, the end of the time in Memphis was Jaren Jackson, and even 2 months with Ja Morant, and so and under Taylor Jenkins, and obviously JB Bickerstaff in between Coach Fizdale and Taylor. But Memphis was an amazing experience. It allowed me to grow. My first role there was as an advanced scout, so I wasn't around the team as much as I had been before. But it kind of gave me an opportunity to really get out, study coaches, study offenses and defenses, and really know what coaches in different organizations are trying to do schematically. And so that was a really awesome experience for me that first year. And then the next 2 years, I spent on the coaching staff in a player development, assistant coach, player development capacity.
So as you're at these two places and everywhere you've gone, how do you go about collecting your experiences and the things that you learned? Are you putting that into a file? Are you putting that into a notebook? Are you mentally categorizing things? How are you sort of consolidating all the things that you've learned over the course of these different experiences that you've had in the league?
Well, it's changed. Early on, a lot of the stuff was, we still were using big binders. And then, at some point during that, we went to hard drives. And at some point during that, the hard drives crashed. So then, you start to figure out, other ways of keeping your information. Right now, I use an iPad, and I have about 3 hard drives that I try to keep fresh, with not only just notes and different thoughts and adjustments that we've made throughout the years. But also, again, like I said, the game is completely evolving and always evolving. So, some of the stuff that I had in my early years in LA is no longer relevant, and you could say the same in Memphis, right? Like, so. From the X's and O's standpoint, some of that stuff might be a bit outdated, but I think the biggest thing that you can take with you is your experiences. How different coaches handled certain situations as they came up with the team, both positively and negatively. And so, for me, it's the personal piece more so than the X's and O's or anything that could happen schematically. It's more studying the different coaches that I've been around, and strengths and weaknesses, and how they handled certain situations. Like I said, whether it be with the team, whether it be with the front office, whether it be with the organization, whether it be with the fan base, or whatnot, or with the media. So,
yeah, I would think trying to figure out how to go about handling those different situations that coaches face all the time. And like you said, the X's and O's is constantly evolving. And I think you're probably, you're constantly learning and updating what works and what doesn't. And clearly the things that worked 10 years ago are things that have evolved and changed over time. But it's those things that are kind of the enduring, how do I deal with this situation with players or between teammates, or how do I handle when a player comes to me with this, or an owner comes to me with that, or the GM comes and we have this conversation. Those are all things that I'm sure as you go and you get an opportunity to work with some of the people that you've been able to work with, that you're picking their brain and you're watching and observing what they do and just putting those all in your file, on your iPad, in your hard drive, wherever you want to put it, so that you have it, so that you can pull it out when the time is right. All right, let's jump ahead to what you're doing now with the Cavs. Talk a little bit about your role, exactly what you're doing day to day. Let's take it from both what you've kind of been doing day to day when there's nothing to do during the quarantine, and then maybe more of what your day to day looks like when hopefully we get back to normal at some point.
So, obviously super excited to be going into my second season here in Cleveland with the Cavs. Day to day has been different in quarantine. We have a lot of Zoom calls. I've kind of taken a deep dive into what a lot of teams, a lot of the trends and stuff that were presenting themselves down in the bubble. And again, it kind of gave me an opportunity to kind of get back to the basics and, see what, Coach Brad Stevens was doing, or, what Frank Vogel was doing, or what Eric Spoelstra was doing, or what Nick Nurse was doing. And that was a really amazing experience for me, because after every game the next day, I could take my time and kind of do a deep dive of, different defensive schemes, or, different plays or different play sets that they had going. So during COVID, it's been a lot of that, coupled with a lot of Zoom calls. We were able to have our in-market bubble here with the team, and that was really good to just kind of get back with the staff, get back with the team, and be able to put in some good work, and hopefully prepare us well as we get ready for training camp, whenever that is. But guys are back in the gym, and we have different precautions that we have to take in order to be able to work with our guys one-on-one. But it's certainly nothing like it was prior to COVID, and so I think we're all just kind of learning how to deal with this new normal.
How are the players handling it? What are you hearing from them in terms of how chomping at the bit, how ready are they to get back out on the floor and start playing and start competing again? I can't even imagine at this point in your career, especially for some of the younger guys you have on the roster, to sit around and not be able to play in an NBA game for whatever it's going to end up being by the time games kick off. I can't even imagine that, what they're going through, trying to just keep themselves ready to go. And then still, we don't know for sure when the season's going to start.
Yeah. I think our guys are more eager than most. Obviously the coaching change happened at the All-Star break last year. And this team, as it's currently built under JB, we only got 11 games, and I think the guys started to really kind of like find their stride as a team, and we were starting to play some more inspired and more competitive basketball during that time. And so I think the guys feel like they got robbed almost, but we've kind of used this as a way to come together and to say that, as JB puts it, whenever the NBA is throwing a party, we want to make sure that we're invited. And essentially what that means is, if it's playoffs or whatever, we want to make sure that we're on that invite list. And I think it really hurt to not be involved in the bubble in Orlando. We certainly understand where the league was coming from in their decisions. And obviously we weren't alone in that. But, for us, anytime there's an elite group of teams getting together to play competitive basketball, we want to be a part of that group. And so we've kind of used that as motivation, and to not take anything for granted, and to always put our best foot forward when we get an opportunity to play basketball.
All right, let's talk for a second about just the two young guys that we have on the roster, Colin Sexton and Darius Garland, and what they're looking at coming into this season in terms of what have they been working on to try to add to their game, so that when the league does come back, what are they going to look like, coming out of this layoff? What are some things that they've been trying to add to their game?
Well, both of those guys have an unbelievably driven work ethic. They're different in kind of like their day to day, but both of them are extremely hard workers and very focused. For both of them, it's been outside shooting. You look at the bubble, and both of them are extreme students of the game, right? So you look in the bubble and you see Jamal Murray and Damian Lillard and some of these guys pulling up from deep threes, right? And it seems as if that's going to be a continuing trend, because it makes it harder to get into pick and roll coverages that far out on the floor. Makes it harder to defend that far out on the floor. So both of those guys are working on extending their range. Both of them obviously our guards. So the ability to play make for other people is extremely important. And we started to play bigger down the stretch with like Larry Nance Jr. At our 3 spot, and so I think just having the ability to play with bigger players, but also having essentially 3 pick and roll players out on the floor with Larry, K-Love and Drummond out on the floor, I think will really help those guys. So their ability to play make and see the floor is something that they've really been working on.
When you guys are looking at what you're going to do in free agency, and obviously you're not, players have decisions to make and you guys have decisions to make about where money goes and what ends up happening. But when you look at kind of the free agent landscape, just rather than talking about specific players, just maybe talk about kind of the process that you as the coaching staff go through to work with the front office to make those decisions about maybe who you're going to target, who you're going to re-sign if it's a current player, who's going out and kind of scouting the free agents that are already in the league. What does that whole process look like from an organizational standpoint?
I think it's taken a deep dive at your roster and the DNA that you have. And I think with any team, one of the biggest things that you want to make sure as you try to acquire free agents or draft picks is that player going to fit in well with the nucleus that you have, or is that player going to fit in well with the I don't really like using culture, but the environment that you have in your building. And so I think that's important. And again, not just specifically for us, but for anybody, defense is at a premium, right? So, you're always looking for the best lineups on the floor, that can be highly competitive and defend against some of the elite players in the league. But most importantly, Mike, I think, before you start to look at, free agents and draft picks, I think you're as a staff, you have to make sure that you're doing your job and taking the right steps to develop the guys that you have. And I think, the guys in your building become the most important. And I think, that's what our players feel. And that's certainly, our mission is to make them the best basketball players that we can before we start to, look outside the building.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point, is if you can internally develop the guys that you already have, clearly there's value in that rather than having to go out and spend new money and bring in a guy that you may think what you're bringing in, but there's obviously no guarantees, whereas a guy that you've already had the opportunity firsthand to see what they can bring to the table, if you can get that internal improvement, that's really where you have something. We're coming up close to an hour and a half, JJ. I want to ask you one final question just about Coach Bickerstaff. And now that you've had an opportunity to work with him, and obviously you've known him for a long time, and you were with him for a little bit of time in Memphis, what, if you had to describe one or two of his biggest strengths as a coach, what is something that he brings to the table that you think is going to lead to him having success with the Cavs over the next several years?
He's an unbelievable basketball mind. He's obviously an NBA lifer. He's seen so many different situations. There's no situation except for maybe COVID that's come up that he hasn't seen. And I'm extremely proud of him and our staff to be leaders throughout this period, not only with the COVID, but a lot of the social unrest and issues that we see in our country right now that affect all of us, but especially, our players. And so he's done a great job at leading them through this, as it was all, uncharted territory for all of us. But also too, just from a pure basketball standpoint, JB's a basketball purist. He doesn't have an ego. He doesn't have, he's not one of those, me guys. He's not me first. He's all about the players. And if it's not about basketball and it's not about winning, then he's not about it. And so I think that's what our guys know about him, and they believe that about him, and it's genuine and it's authentic. But his biggest strength is that he's a basketball purist, and he's also a great communicator. in that regard. And at this level, that's one of the things that is extremely important. There's a lot of guys out there that know a lot about basketball, like I alluded to before. We have some great coaches in this league, but the ones that can communicate it with their players and get their players to compete on a nightly basis are the ones that have success.
Well, I know I can speak for Jason and myself. We're looking forward to seeing the Cavs back out on the floor and getting a chance and watch and see what JB and you and the rest of the staff can do with the players. And hopefully we can work ourselves back up towards playoff contention this coming season, whenever that season ends up being. And we cannot thank you enough, JJ, for spending an hour and a half with us tonight. It was a true pleasure. I don't know if you want to share out how people can reach out to you if they have a question just after listening to the podcast, or maybe they just want to talk some basketball with you, and then I'll jump back in and wrap up the episode.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you guys having me, man. This was an awesome experience. We are going to do absolutely everything in our power, and I know our organization and team is going to do absolutely everything in their power to get back, to the top and be a highly competitive basketball team again. If anybody has any, questions for me, I'm always willing to answer direct messages on Instagram. That's probably the best way to find me, at Just Outlaw on Instagram. But anybody have any questions about anything basketball, how to get into the business, or just any coaching questions at all is probably the best way.
Fantastic. JJ, again, we cannot thank you enough for taking the time out of your schedule to join us tonight. We truly appreciate it. And to everyone out there, thanks for listening, and we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks. If you have an existing podcast or are looking to launch your own pod but aren't sure where to start, the team at My Podcast Manager can help. Our podcast team works behind the scenes so you can do what you do best. We'll help you launch your podcast, make it sound great, and free up your time for the more enjoyable parts of podcasting. If you're ready to put your podcast editing, production, and promotion on autopilot with a trusted team of podcasting professionals, visit mypodcastmanager.com to get started.
Thanks for listening to the Hoop Heads podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.